Good evening. I'm James Butler. I'm the Co-op Party and welcome to Cooperation Live, Food Justice in Action. I'm sure everyone joining us will be familiar with the format. We will be recording tonight's presentation and uploading it later to YouTube. If you would prefer that your image is not used, please turn your cameras off now. We should have some time for questions afterwards, but we'll run through the presentations first. Each of the panel will have between 7 and 10 minutes or so, which should leave us plenty of time for questions afterwards. So hold fire until the end with questions and we'll do hands up, either manually or electronic hands up, and we'll keep an eye on that. This Zoom fits into our long-standing food justice campaign. If you're new to the Co-op Party or subsequently inspired to campaign on the issue after the presentation, check out our website. It's got a ton of things locally that you can take action on. But let me very quickly introduce our great panel. Is the mission manager for access to food for the Co-op group. Under the Access to Food mission, he seeks work with partners to help communities develop their relationships with food away from models of dependency by creating avenues for greater cooperation. The first recently announced partnership with Hubbub will see the existing community fridge network increase to 250 community fridges over the next year, saving a further 6.8 million meals per year from going to waste. The move builds on the success of the existing 150 fridges in the network, which already distribute an average of almost 6,000 meals per fridge each month. Tessa Trix is a creative partner at environmental charity Hubbub. Tessa's developed Hubbub's food work over the last 6 years, working with leading brands, local government and community groups to creating lasting change. Her work is centered on increased food skills, promoting high veg diets and reducing food waste through initiatives such as the Community Fridge Network. Do check out TEDx talk on the social dynamics of meat. I did earlier, and it's genuinely fascinating. And last but by no means least, Gareth Brown. Gareth helped Action Network in 2014 as a joint response from local churches who had previously set up a local food bank a couple of years before. The network has since been able to create and develop community cafes, food pantries, growing spaces, co-working spaces, places of welcome alongside the food bank. And they've recently secured funding to set up a community bakery to help local people find new employment, volunteering and training opportunities. He's also a team pastor of a local inner city church in the Cape Hill area of Smethwick, and is passionate about ensuring the local community has access to church buildings for developing community businesses, social enterprises, and of course, cooperatives. Let's hear from Ed.
Thank you very much. So, as said, I'm Ed Powell. I work for the Co-op group, probably most known for being a food provider and a funeral care provider. One of the questions that I was asked was, why is food justice a cooperative issue? I think I can answer this in two ways. One is because of our history, and the second is because of our identity. So as part of the Co-op group, our history comes from the Rochdale Society of Pioneers from 1844. And that actually was a group of people that got together around food injustice in their community, a lack of access to fair food, to flour that was cut badly and was expensive. And actually that response of 28 people getting together to feed themselves and their communities and meet around a membership model was the start of cooperation and the formation of the cooperative group from that. Now that's really important, because actually that history is a challenge to us, because actually our identity just challenges us to look at the same issues in today's society. They may come about for different reasons, but our history tells us that as an organisation, we will try and make a difference in and around food justice. Likewise, our identity is really important. And I can talk about the Co-op group as an institution as a body, but I can also talk about it as part of a movement. The Co-op group has around 4.5 million members. That's a considerable amount of people. But let's remember, in the UK, there are 13.9 million members of co-ops. And when we can work together, we can work with people to both sell things, but we can also campaign. And as a movement, we are formed for the benefit of our members and the benefit of the community. And those issues that were faced by people in 1844 are issues that we face today. And our identity is formed around a series of values and principles. And I talk about self-help and self-responsibility as those values. So when James introduced and said we were looking at solutions which were around moving away from dependency to independence, that is absolutely right and fits in line with those values. We also have principles, education, training and information. And I recognise that we're in the middle of Co-op Fortnight. And one of the target audiences is talking to people that have an influence and can make a difference. And as a campaigning organisation, we will do that. But I recognise you are some of those people and have that responsibility. But we also work with other cooperatives and in community. Our vision as the Co-op group is to cooperate for a fairer world. And that takes three forms: supporting our colleagues, supporting members and communities, and supporting our planet. And actually, I think what you'll see across the country, different co-ops doing a fairly similar thing, because it all comes out of that shared identity and shared DNA. So that means that we need to look in and address the issues of society today. But the Co-op group are not an organisation which will do two, but we're an organisation which will work with. That's at the base of who we are. And we recognise that over the last few years, issues around food injustice have become bigger. We know that in the UK, there were around 3 food banks in 2000. We're at about 2,300 now. And that fastened through the pandemic. We saw some fantastic work through that, of which the Co-op played their part. We responded supporting organisations like the National Emergency Trust, giving our members opportunities to support there too. We supported Fair Share, delivering 1.5 million of food through Fair Share. But I think as I talk about those things, I feel both heartened that we have concern for the community and will meet at need, but I also feel concerned for our future as a country. And as we look forward as the Co-op group, we're looking to change our approach. And that's why I've been employed in this role this year, to look to the horizon and look at solutions which can move us from dependency to interdependency, and recognise in a way that communities don't just have needs, but communities are rich in skills, knowledge and experience. And the role of the Co-op group and the role of the Co-op, the movement, is to work in that space. So what is the Co-op doing in that space? I think I will let Tessa speak for our partnership work with Community Fridges. But we can say that we want to work actively with other great organisations to create solutions that deliver in community. And I think there are other great opportunities to do that with cooperative distinction. Local pantry, one of those models, and Gareth will speak about that. I think there's also opportunities with the Co-op movement, with things like allotment associations and growing together. The Co-op group will play their part. They will support with finance. We will support with experience, but we will also be very, very tangible with the things we are doing. So when we put our resources behind things, these are the kind of things I mean. We have 1,000 member pioneers, which are community organisers across communities in the country. They will help play their part looking into campaigns like the Co-op Party's Food Justice campaign to help campaign for local food champions, to create local action plans and work bringing communities together. We will change and refocus our resources. Our local community fund is focused on the 3 areas that our members identified, and one of those is access to food in community. And we will use our commercial relationships as well to help other organisations to be able to play their part. But this really is a ladder of activity. So we will do some of the hygiene factors. So wherever we have food, we will use it well. So we have a food share scheme that supports and gives to things like community fridges. I think that's a really complex issue, and I won't move away from saying that we want to put less food into the system in the first place, because there's the complexity of making sure we're addressing climate change issues and human issues. But we will always try to use food well and do it better. Secondly, within communities, build that network in local communities with our member pioneers, using our store base, using our assets and resources. We will do things like, for example, looking at how we can use our member data to try and identify where there are issues of food security and food insecurity. Hi, Phil. And we will also look to work as a campaigning organisation to take opportunities to try and move forward. So the example of our work with Marcus Rashford, you will see the positioning we took last year in supporting through the pandemic. But in his words, that was a sticking plaster. And we will move forward together and create more sustainable solutions. So the example of his cooking school with Tom Kerridge, the example of how we used our partnerships with Mind, Sam H and Inspire, with the National Emergencies Trust, with the community foundations, to drive that message out, to help young people to learn about food, is very important to us. And we will use our position to be able to campaign. And it is working with people like yourselves that we will do that. We don't have all the solutions, but we wish to do that with you. I think that's my time, so thank you.
Well, thank you, Ed. You can tell he's absolute professional, bang on 10 minutes. Amazing job. Over to Tessa, please.
Brilliant. So hi, I'm Tessa, and thank you so much for inviting me along this evening. I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to talk about our community fridge work and co-op partnership, and most importantly, how you can get involved. So before I move on to community fridges, I want to give a brief introduction to Hubbub and our wider food work. So for anyone not too familiar with Hubbub, we're a charity that inspires ways of living that are good for the environment. We do this by tapping into people's interests and designing campaigns that are fun, easy to get on board with, and really relevant to our day-to-day lives. And in order to do this, we know we have to meet everyone where they're at. And as such, we theme our work around people's interests and lives, such as the food they eat, the clothes they wear, the homes and neighbourhoods they live in. We base our work on research and insight and measure all that we do in order to know what makes a really tangible difference. And we believe that collaboration is really key to making change at the pace and scale needed, which is why I'm really thrilled to be here today. And we work with corporates right through to community groups to make sure that we're getting our message to the right people. Smart design and behaviour change theory are central to our approach. And it's ultimately our ambition to learn fast, fail cheap, and openly scale what works, as we'll see really shortly with our community fridge work. But before I introduce the community fridges, I want to give a quick taste of our wider food work, which over the last 6 years or so is really sought to make sustainable, affordable diets accessible to all through sharing information, making doing the right thing appealing, or creating new spaces and services. For example, our longest running campaign, The Pumpkin Rescue, uses pumpkins as a hook to talk about food waste year round and has been replicated by over 250 community groups each Halloween. We've worked with a range of retailers and local authorities to run behaviour change interventions to cut food waste and help people adopt sustainable, healthy and affordable diets. We've launched 4 community kitchens and run hundreds of cooking workshops across the UK in between. And we've tackled cultural issues such as meat and masculinity, for example, with our Meet Your Match campaign, which supported gym-going men to halve their animal-based protein while meeting their fitness targets. Our community fridge work really sits at the intersection of our sustainable diets communication, providing the infrastructure to reduce waste, but also hubs from which to share skills and information. So without further ado, I'll move on to the detail of community fridges, their relationships to many of the food justice issues which Ed's just talked on, and crucially, how you can get involved. So what is a community fridge? Well, I think the short answer is a space where anyone in the community can exchange surplus food. Community fridges are friendly, open to all, accessible, community-led, and focused on the environmental impact of reducing food waste. They're not food banks, a solution to food insecurity, or means tested. Run by local volunteers, many fridges also provide a positive and social space for local visitors to learn more about food, sustainable eating, growing your own, and eating on a budget. They accept surplus from local businesses, gardens and households, and exist in all manner of public spaces, from car parks to community centres to churches. We first trialled the community fridge concept in Swadlincote, Derbyshire in 2016. And at the time, we were really looking for ways to tackle food waste at the local level, which we were seeing coming from businesses small and often, but also from households. There were very similar schemes in other countries like Spain and India, but nothing in the UK. And as you might expect, in the first instance, there are a lot of concerns around vandalism and food safety. We worked really closely with the Food Standards Agency to develop robust food safety processes. And to date, there have been no issues of vandalism. But overall, the initial trial went really well, with the fridge being used by a cross-section of the community. And we also shared recipe cards and tips on how to reduce food waste at home. The Swadlincote fridge received a lot of attention, and we soon went on to pilot community fridges in a variety of different communities. What remained the same was that community fridges were open to all and really centred around ways to support engagement with sustainable living. In 2017, really to meet ever-rising demand from communities, local authorities, we set up the Community Fridge Network. And in essence, we really sought to open source the process that we've been through in Swadlincote in our early kind of pioneer communities. Through the network, we provide step-by-step guidance to help groups operate safely and maintain a welcoming, friendly space for all visitors. Members of the network register as food businesses and they receive a food hygiene rating. And they agree that they'll share learnings, impact, and uphold really the high standards that we've set. And we're also able to provide design assets and discounted fridge and freezer units. And we invite all members to physical and digital meetups, training sessions, and host a community fridge forum. At current, we have over 150 community fridges open. Our 100th was opened by Prince Charles last September, and our 150, as Ed said, was endorsed by Marcus Rashford. So we find that they really do speak to all people. And I think really that the network's popularity is down to community fridges' multifaceted impact. On average, each fridge redistributes 2.4 tonnes of food per month. At the network level, that's the equivalent of 7.5 million meals per year saved from waste. But at the same time, the impact of community fridges stretches well beyond food saving. They're not just fridges, they're hubs of the community, providing visitors with an opportunity to try new foods, share recipes, meet others, and even cook together. Nearly half of the community fridge network support activities to learn more about sustainable eating and budgeting, as well as initiatives such as cooking and growing workshops, share shops, or food cooperatives. And we know that community fridges provide fresh fruit and veg to those who might be struggling to prioritise it. But I can't really talk about the impact of community fridges without mentioning COVID and the extent to which it's exacerbated the dire food security issue within the UK. In the first few months of the pandemic, about a third of the community fridges closed, while the remainder pivoted to emergency food provision. Many groups felt quite uneasy that this might compromise the ethos of the community fridge network, but at the same time really felt a moral obligation to support their communities. So now, as groups are returning to their former operations, it's more important than ever that we support the resilience building activities at the fridge, such as the sharing of food and growing skills, and supporting things like cooperatives, as Ed said, really supporting people to help themselves and build community support networks and resilience. We've just given out a series of small grants to support existing groups to build out their impact in this way, with the ambition to scale the impact among the network. So what are the next steps for the network? Well, we're delighted to have the Co-op come on board as the headline sponsor, as has been said, and Co-op support will really help us to backfill demand from groups who are interested but don't have the means, and to reach out to new areas. To date, we have allocated about 50 of the 50 new community fridge projects, and we're shortly to announce the next funding round. And this is where you all come in. You can help us to spread the word on funding. The full details will be available on our website from the 7th of July, and I'll pop the link in the chat. Alongside £4,000 worth of funding, successful groups will receive dedicated project setup support, plus access to the Community Fridge Network Forum and all the benefits that I've touched on that come with that. So you can also share food or volunteer at your local fridge. I'll put a map of all the community fridges within the UK in the chat. They stretch all the way from the Isle of Mull to Truro. And I hope you'll take a little bit of a look. And volunteering roles can really stem from business development or food collection, whatever you might have to offer. And equally, of course, you can share food from your own home with the fridge. If you've got a glut of beans coming in the next month or so, community fridges would love to hear from you. So I think that's been a real whistle-stop tour of the community fridge movement, and I'll be more than happy to pick up any questions later. But I think really the bottom line is that demand for community fridges continues to grow, and we're really proud to be working with the Co-op to give communities the autonomy to develop local food justice and climate activities which respond to their really diverse needs. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Tessa. That was amazing. Now we're moving over to Gareth, and just a reminder to Joel, if we could make Gareth a co-host so he can share a video with us, a short video. And then we'll come, after Gareth's done his bit, we'll come back for questions. So if you've got any questions, do put them in the chat, or do, and I can see the one or two already. Alternatively, we'll come back and do them in real life, if that's okay with everybody. Over to you, Gareth.
Thanks, James, and thanks, Ed and Tessa. Hard acts to follow, and I'll do my best, and I'll keep my time as well if I can. Just a quick bit of history. Back in 2012, I was part of a church leaders group here in Smethwick who decided to form a food bank. Austerity was kicking in, demand was increasing in line with other food banks, and I'm sure most of you know how food banks work, because the sad fact is that I imagine most people have been in contact with someone who's needed it. You've been asked to contribute to one, you've probably volunteered for one possibly, and you may have needed it yourself. And we've got over 40 agencies from across the public and charitable sector referring people to food banks. And to be honest, that decision to start a food bank was probably a little naive back in 2012. Churches getting together was probably the miracle in itself, but there'd been very little cooperation in the past, and that was positive. But actually, the sort of naive step to say, yeah, we must get together and have this charitable response of feeding the poor. And it didn't take long to see the weakness in that model. And right from the start, you know, issues of dignity, issues of avoiding this transactional relationship, they really came to the fore. Some of you will know that referrals are, in most cases, are a red voucher. That itself is a colour of crisis, and it's to do with photocopier fraud, but red is not particularly a colour that welcomes people. It has a number, even if now most are electronic rather than red paper, it's still a number, and many of us were further challenged, of course, like many of you will have been, by the Ken Loach film, I, Daniel Blake, and the referral agencies have numbers. They use words like client, and of course, alongside that, the media, and even, dare I say, some politicians were using words like shirkers and scroungers. And you'll be familiar with that quote from I, Daniel Blake, about I'm not a client, a customer, not a service user, or a shirker, or a scrounger, or a beggar, or a thief. And it goes on to say, I don't accept or seek charity. And of course, as a charity ourselves, you know, it's necessary to remember that people don't seek charity, they don't seek our services. But actually what we wanted to ensure, of course, was that Food Bank was not simply a service provision. And we took some first steps to make sure that we offered more than that transaction. We wanted to offer places of welcome, wanted people to have that opportunity to know they could participate, they could be part of something. Or everyone has the potential to give or the potential to receive, because at some point in our life we may need to receive things as well as give. And so participation is very much part of making someone feel part of a community. So really our emphasis changed very quickly from the idea of this transaction to making sure that we built community. I think the one thing that also we saw happen was that people started in being involved with us in starting seeing their own ideas, and things like allotments and Pay As You Feel cafes started out of that process as well very quickly. So building community has been our attempt really to try and tackle food poverty. We can tackle food poverty by dealing obviously with the immediate crisis, and like many, we've had to deal with a huge crisis over these past 15 months. But the community response also was amazing. So in the first 6 months of the lockdown, we experienced a 350% increase in demand, but we also experienced a 400% increase in donations. And communities are strong in crisis. I have a work colleague in one of my other roles, in one of my other jobs, who seemed far more ready actually to deal with COVID because they'd already dealt with the devastation of floods, and they'd already built a community response to floods. And actually they were much more prepared in dealing with this crisis. So there is the immediate, but of course there is also that need to be a voice and an advocate. And for us, that's on a very much local level, revealing to the authorities the dodgy landlords that we see, revealing the cases of modern day slavery that we've seen and trafficking that we've seen, revealing poor and dangerous work conditions, the universal credit weights, the dealing with the unfair assessments. All that stuff has happened on the ground because of where we've been positioned with Food Bank. But of course, we also need to be part of national campaigns as well, and scrapping the things like the 5-week wait and protection for renters and things like that. But our focus primarily for us is about building community, doing all that we can to make sure that people feel that they are connected together. And of course, when people come together, communities start to take action, and that's what we've seen. We know that every primary school in Smethwick has donated at some point to the food bank. Many of them, sadly, are also referral agencies. We know our supermarket collections are well supported, and the community response is always good. So I'm just going to share a very quick video just to show you an example of that community response that happened for us during COVID.
Food Bank! Donations for Food Bank!
It's like a modern-day rag and bone collection, but this is not for clothing or old junk. It's to help feed families.
I'm the loud one, yeah. That's my one sole role, but I like to think I do it well. Donations for Food Bank!
Mike Allen is one of several residents of Galton Road in Bearwood who carry out weekly doorstep food collections from generous neighbours.
It's anything and everything at the moment, because everything is required. So primarily tinned food, dry foods, but also toiletries, pretty much any consumables. So there's always someone out there that needs it.
Helen Gilbert was instrumental in getting it all started.
There was messages from Smethwick Food Bank back in March, and that prompted me to make flyers for the street. So we just kind of got a few neighbours together to start it, and it kind of took off.
And other volunteers find a sense of satisfaction.
We get a lot of collections every week, and the amount that we take to help people in need is rewarding itself than anything else.
People shouldn't have to be relying on food banks for their food to be able to feed their families. There should be a better system, but at the moment that's the way the system is, so we're happy to help out.
This all comes at a time when use of food banks continues to increase, particularly in this part of the West Midlands.
For example, from April 2019 to April 2020, the Smethwick Food Bank gave out 6,000 food parcels to families that need it. But since the start of the pandemic last March, they've given out 92,000.
I don't believe food banks should exist in the society that we live in, but they're here because the people are in such crisis. And the things like the 5-week wait for a universal credit, there are all sorts of things that could be done to help people, but unfortunately haven't been done, and obviously this has exacerbated that.
The food is distributed several times a week, and it's a community pulling together in difficult times to help those in the most difficult circumstances.
Okay, so I think I have a sort of mixed response to watching that again, a mixed response of sadness because of seeing it having to be there, but also a positive response in seeing how the community came together. And I suppose for me, looking at that, it's about how can that relationship go deeper? How can we make our communities come together now to look at the longer term solutions? And once we've settled down post-COVID, because we're still in the midst of it, I'm afraid to say, I want to return obviously to those ideas of buying food together collectively, making a network of growing spaces as we've started to do, cafes, working with churches to set up community kitchens, and developing new responses. Those are the things that we want to be involved in long term. And regardless of what you think of food banks, I know for me they're something I want to see the back of, but we do have an obligation, I feel, to build on the community goodwill that we have seen. And one of the building community responses that we've had has been to start a food pantry. And essentially that's being part of an expanding network of community food clubs. Ours was the first to open in a library, but again, due to the closures, we reverted back to a church hall, and we've remained open during the pandemic on an appointment basis. It's a membership-based pantry. There's no referral system. Lots of us, we can all be members, we can say yes, and we charge a membership fee of £4 per week. And with surplus food, the main offer, we know that we're also helping tackle food waste as well as providing quality food. So like a food bank, we do have fridges and freezers, and we kit out our pantry a bit like a corner shop, a large spacious corner shop at the moment because of social distancing. That's why we're in this massive church hall. But we provide, people choose their groceries as well, and they can get around about £20 to £25 worth of food for their weekly £4 fee. But people get to do what we all get to do, which is within a shop or a supermarket, which is obviously to choose. And with the appointment system and with longer opening hours, what we've also been, and this wide open space, what we've also been able to do is to chat and talk to people and been part of that community again, a bit like the old fashioned corner shop, or perhaps dare I say a good old fashioned co-op store. So how do we want to get people involved? Well, we want people to do what they're doing. There's always a role for charities, social enterprise and cooperatives, but we also make sure we need to keep campaigning. I personally thank those that have made a sacrifice in their times listening to people who come to Food Bank, but also for those who take action like Acorn, trade unions, Labour cooperative parties for keeping the pressure on those who are making decisions. And if you're local to Smethwick, we'd love obviously volunteers, particularly for our growing spaces as they develop. We've already got a community allotment and a community orchard. And we're also looking now at taking some of those smaller spaces within church buildings to turn them into growing spaces that people can access more locally. And our pantry, which is already expanding into different locations. Donations are always needed, and we're hoping to do some work over the next few months in also improving some community kitchens to make them more accessible to people from the community outside of the local churches. And allowing people to be together and connect together, that's what we want to do. You know, I work in churches that have altars and stained glass windows, but for me, the most important place that I want to do is sit around a table again, and sit around and have meals and connect with people again and build community again, because around that table, that's where some of the best ideas and best projects have happened. That's how our allotment started. That's how our cafe actually started, is around a table. So building those cooperative approaches together and building community together so that actually one day that food bank that unfortunately, naively, we started in 2012 will one day cease.
Thank you so much, Gareth. Thank you, Tessa and Ed also. I should mention, for those of you who want even more inspiration, Gareth and Tessa have done very kindly written some blogs on our website. So if you've not seen those, go onto our website into the news section and have a read of some of the great work that they're doing, which will very much complement, I think, this evening's presentations. Now, we've got about 20 minutes or so for questions. And I see that from the chat, some questions have already been answered. If people can put their hands up, and I'll go to gallery view so I can see a few people. I want to take maybe 2 or 3 questions at once. So I've got Joe Joseph's hand up, and I'm going to ask you to unmute in a second, Joe. Is there anybody else who has got an immediate question? If not, we'll go with Joe, and I will supplement it with a couple of questions which have been on my mind. So Joe, can you fire away, please? And if you could just introduce yourself as well, that'd be great.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry I'm not on video. I'm Joe Joseph. I'm convener of the West Country Labour and Cooperative Farming Policy Advisory Group. So we're looking at food from the food producers side of the equation. About 75% of the farmers in our region are small scale. That's below 50 acres, 30 football pitches, 800 tennis courts for those that aren't familiar with acres. Basically, one of the things that we're conscious of is that we're talking about food distribution and things, but we're not talking about food production in quite the same way. And we feel we need to link together more effectively. So my question really is for Ed. you know, how can we get the localism agenda going with the cooperative group so that they're purchasing from small scale farmers and we're not having to find niche markets amongst the wealthy, so that we can get our food into the stores, not just the large scale transnational providers of commercial food. Okay,
if you could just hold.
That's a great question.
If you could just hold on answering that for a second, I'll bring in Emma Hodinott, who's got a question. Hi, Emma, how are you doing?
Hi, thanks. And I'm asking this question not as a Co-op Party member of staff, but I'm a local councillor and very involved with what is now a social supermarket and cafe. And I'm interested to hear from from all the panel actually about a problem that we've had to deal with that the Rochdale pioneers didn't have to, and that's around food hygiene and standards and regulation. So the pantry, the fridge, they're all fantastic ideas and we've got fantastic volunteers, but there is a lot of regulation, and I'd be really willing to hear sort of the tips, how you navigate that and how you don't squash sort of good ideas with all that regulation.
Great. So we've got two questions, one from Joe, very specifically to Ed, a more general one from Emma on food hygiene. And can I add a third question for all of you? And that's, what is the one thing that people here can go away and do, the practical thing that people can do to deliver food justice or help their pantry or set up a community fridge? How the one action you want them to do? But if I can go to Ed, Tessa and Gareth in order again then.
Great. Okay, I think that's a fantastic question, Joe. Thank you. One thing I would recommend you look at is our future of food, which helps to address those issues around producers. It's actually really good timing, your question, because we're reviewing that work over this year and just into the beginning of next year. So the question of how we work in food production and responsibility there, we're going to be asking ourselves and asking for input in. So either you can have my email address. I'm very happy to speak to you about that. But also we have a site called Join In, and we give opportunities for our members to participate in that future of food journey. So please take part in those opportunities. The other thing I'd say from the wider movement is please look at the Plunkett Foundation's work around campaigning around local food agenda. I think that's really good and will be supportive of what you're trying to achieve. I'll just say one thing on food safety and hygiene. I think that Tessa's probably got a bit more of me on it, but one of the issues I've been facing into this week with our food share scheme, so that's our food excess from our stores rather than from our distribution centres, is around premises registration. And actually I've seen within our scheme, actually it says that you need that. And actually I've been challenging that this week, looking into it. And actually what we need to do is change the way we've written to support community organisations. Actually, it's about having the application in for the registration, not actually receiving that confirmation back that you have. And actually, we need to be clearer with our language and the advice we're giving to be able to support community actions in that. So I'm trying to make a tangible change, which you'll see hopefully on our website and in that scheme by next week.
If we can go to Tessa next, please.
Brilliant. Okay. So Emma, I'll pick up on your question on food hygiene. Then I think it's certainly a tricky one, isn't it? And I think it, on the one hand, as you say, can certainly squash ideas, but I think getting all of those kind of ducks in a row is a great way to just have a kind of professionalized and respected local initiative, whether that's a pantry, whether it's a fridge, whether it's a community kitchen. So what we've really tried to do with the Community Fridge Network is take that legwork out for community groups, because it took us an awful long time to navigate it when we started in Swaddling-Cote. So certainly kind of open sourcing some of those models has been what we've been intending to do. I can certainly share our guidance there with you. I think it's very applicable to pantries or community kitchens, whatever you're doing, as well as fridges. But it is, as Ed says, a very tricky one to navigate. And I think people get really scared about it. But actually, at the end of the day, it's a lot of common sense. There's a lot of just making sure that you've got all the right procedures in place. And I think as long as everyone's kind of on board, everyone feels much happier. And given the fact that we are working with food at the end of its life, often, I mean, certainly with the community fridge network, the amount of the majority of the food that's coming through comes from food that's past its best before date, but is within its use by dates. That means that, unlike a food bank, we can deal with fresh and largely more nutritious food. But it does obviously mean that, yeah, we have to be really careful about these things. So I guess what I would say is just, you know, try and work with it, break it down into manageable chunks. I'll share what we can and see if you can get your whole team on board, because it's not rocket science at the end of the day, but it can seem overwhelming at the first glance. Should we take the answer about what people do now, or is that the next round? Okay, great. So I think from my point of view, we've touched on so many great things that people get involved in. And I think it's looking at the local level. Do you have a local collaborative purchasing group? If not, could you set one up? Or local allotments is the one that you could get involved in. Similarly to a community fridge, I think all of these things just really help to build local food movements. Maybe you live somewhere where there's already a local food partnership and things going on. And I think it's a great way to actually kind of build community, forge links with new people. I think it's very much human nature to want to share food, and it's a real kind of leveler and a nice way to build friendships. So I think it's kind of getting out, meeting people around local food justice, and just kind of starting with one small action that will add up.
Okay. Yeah, I think I don't feel at all qualified to probably answer Joe's question, but I do think in terms of one of the responsibilities that I feel quite strongly about is obviously when we're doing the growing spaces projects, community orchard projects, that alongside that is education, and making sure that obviously we educate people about food sources and actually seeing those things actually in action, which for many children and young people in urban areas where I live, that's something they don't see. So actually to make that visible, I think is really important, and to make that happen in local urban areas is really important as well. I think just in terms of food hygiene, I would say that probably the thing that I would have benefited most from is collaboration, networking, and being part of something like, for example, the Community Fridge Network, which is obviously a brilliant example, or your local pantry for us, in terms of connecting with those who've already gone through the pain to some degree of making those things happen. And I think also making sure we collaborate. I think what's happened actually during COVID, I've found, is our public health team in particular have been far more proactive in working with us. So even though we've had to do all the risk assessments for every reopening or every restart or every weekly, sometimes early on it was every week, at least we've had them on board and on side very early on. And I'm hoping that sort of stuff will continue, that sort of collaboration. It hasn't just been the community collaboration, there's actually been, from my perspective here in Sandwell, some really good collaboration with public health and with local authority. I think in terms of the one thing, I think it probably goes back to what I talked about earlier, which is the table, the idea just to listen and pull up a chair and actually listen to stories, listen to what people are going through, and to work with people, to participate with people, and work with, find solutions from each other, and to value those participants. That's how things have started for us. They've started because people wanted to start a community allotment, or they wanted to start a pay-as-you-feel cafe. It's not something that we forced upon people. It's because they've actually sat down and said, oh, we really want to get involved and do this together. So I think listening and pulling up a chair would be the thing that I'd want to do the most.
Thank you so much. Now we've got, I think, just about time for one more round of questions, and I can see Mary Fee, you have your hand up. So Mary, and if there's anybody else who has got a last question, please ask now or forever remain silent. But Mary, fire away, please.
Yeah, I'm very impressed with what I've heard about these projects. I've been looking after Let's Group since about the year 2000, and they've always had regular meetings, and I've heard them talking about bring and share, and I wondered if this might be a useful model to incorporate in some of the food work. Let's groups are local exchange trading schemes where they have their own tokens within a group. Do you understand what I mean?
If you could, Tessa and Gareth and Ed May, I'm new to this, so could you explain a little bit more, just for me, if no one else, that would be brilliant.
Okay, a local exchange trading scheme, it's fairly formal. Members have an account and each group has its own currency, and it's like a virtual currency. And if somebody does something for you, or you buy secondhand things, you can pay them. And they used to be very cumbersome with these with checks, and then somebody had to do the transactions. But now we've got online systems, so it's you can get the immediate result. You can see what's going on on a daily basis, and it's a way of people knowing that they're kind of pulling their weight. That you can ask somebody for something, because then you give something back to somebody else. That's why you use a currency, because you don't have to just barter with somebody or do something for that person. You can do something for someone else in the group.
Okay,
does that make sense?
Very much so, I think.
It does make sense.
Over to Ed, Tessa and Gareth to answer the question about Let's. And if I could throw in one final question in addition to Mary's question. And it's kind of my impression during the lockdowns was that there was an outpouring of goodwill and an upsurge in volunteering. Has that continued? And what steps have you made perhaps to try and continue that surge of goodwill? If you could try and answer either of those, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, so in regards to the idea of schemes, I think there is a lot of really good stuff in Let schemes, and actually the idea of sharing with one another is very much part of this. But I think there's a little bit more, and I'd almost like to take it a step further, use the word of generosity, because in the Let scheme we talk about the idea of relationship. And actually, I think we're trying to utilize what we've seen through the pandemic and beyond, that actually there is an emotional relationship, social bonds rebuilding. Yeah. I take from what Gareth has said, actually, the link between food, the idea of feast and generosity, and the idea of people coming together and sharing around their own well-being. So I want to make sure that we use the good idea of Let schemes to recognise that everyone has skills, knowledge, experience, or something to bring. But what we do is we take it a further than being like for like, but go, actually, what can we bring to the table regardless? And I feel it's an opportunity for us to share beyond a like for like. So I want to challenge us to go further than Let schemes ever have.
Tessa, do you want to?
Yeah, sorry, I think Ed's put that brilliantly, so I would absolutely want to build on that. And I think, Mary, what we see happen informally around community fridges, and it's certainly something that we want to kind of bolster through just kind of normalization, is the sense of exchange. So on the one hand, there are lots of things like time banking seems to be a kind of similar scheme that exists. But we see kind of informal reciprocity kind of happens at the community fridge as well, which I think is really tied into the sense of dignity. So I think a lot of people, if they are using the fridges, they're made by the community for the community. So people feel actually they want to find their own way to give back. So we don't put kind of values on it, but most people just become kind of embedded within that social network and find their own way to continue that relationship, whatever it may be. But I think more generally, the kind of key ambition and what we see as the strength of the fridge is that actually, it's a hub for being able to build out these other spaces where people can either just share household items as well as food, or share skills, time, etc. So no, it sounds like I've not heard of the Let's scheme formally, but I will go away and have a look after this.
Thanks, Tess. I think all I would probably add to that is that I think the idea of obviously having something that shows value, that obviously what I contribute is of value, is really important. And I'd also like to look at it a bit more in detail. I've heard of it, but I've not really spent a lot of time. I'm probably more familiar with the time banking that Tessa mentioned. I think I would probably just say that one of the experiences that I've seen here has been that obviously, particularly with people that have experienced having to use a food bank and then gone on to volunteer, is that often those people, because of their gratitude and their desire to actually want to go beyond probably what they actually, they've gone beyond in terms of serving in community kitchen or in the allotment, and that sense of they want to be generous. And I think I wouldn't want to hold that generosity back, as Ed said. And I think that's an interesting sort of, I don't know how the scheme exactly works in that sense, that actually they probably want to go beyond the transaction to actually being more generous than perhaps they feel that others might feel they need to be. So I think I've definitely seen that within. And I think also I don't want to hold back people's ambitions either, in terms of, we've had people that have gone through quite a lot of trauma in their lives, and when they've started in the warehouse, or they've started doing something just very in the background, but actually as their confidence builds, the ambition to do things grows. And I think I don't want to hold that back either. So I'd be interested to look at the different schemes and look at the Let's scheme, but I think those are the things I'd be very sort of cautious on, but actually wanted to make sure that people feel valued, people feel they can go beyond and be more generous than perhaps people might expect, and also they can be ambitious in what they actually do moving forward.
To just respond to the question that was put at the end on what are we seeing in communities and the spirit and generosity at towards the end of the pandemic. Of course, we're not at the end, but we're still seeing that come through. But as people sort of return to some sense of normality, there's the challenges of the other things that they had in their lives before. But some of that pause that people have been to has caused some space and some opportunity to work with people. So what are we doing to try and help that really practically? I talked about our member pioneers. These are community organisers. I can go into the background of all of it. It's built around work I'd done previously at the Scarman Trust, around asset-based community development, and around trying to link communities together and utilise that uplift that we're seeing in people's volunteering. But we're also doing things like developing an online community centre called Co-operate. And next week, we will launch our pages around access to food, creating a space where people can give the opportunity to volunteer or volunteer themselves. So creating space where people can share. And the idea is that platform is an enabler for physical communities. So that's really two practical things: link into your local member pioneers to help them do some of the connection work for you and with you, and look at Co-operate next week when the access to food pages come out.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I realise there are a few more questions and lots from Phil. Perhaps Phil, I can have that conversation with you offline. I'm keen to wrap up and let our very brilliant panel off for the evening. We've taken up too much of their time already. So I'd like to thank you all for coming. I would like a special thanks to Ed Powell from the Co-op group. Question from Alison about the link. You know what? We will distribute that link on the 7th of July to members, I'm sure, through networks. This video will be available in the next couple of days' time when comms upload it. So thank you to Ed Powell from the Co-op group. Thank you to Tessa Trix from the Hubbub. Thank you for Gareth Brown from the Smethwick Church Action Network. And also a very special thanks to people who don't normally get thanks. That's Joel, my colleague, who's been behind the scenes making it all work. And also to Susie, who's been doing the closed captions so that people can see our words. So thank you all and good night. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Hi, Susie, you there?
Thank you. I think it's just us left.